Good evening. Thanks for taking a little bit out of your time to come learn a little bit about our operator candidates, our operator positions that we're about ready to do testing and interviewing and the whole process. We're here not just to teach you a little bit about Nutrien, but also about the benefits, some test questions to hopefully kind of help you along the way as those testing sessions come about. And then finally, hopefully some FAQs about the operator position itself, just to help you learn about what everyday life is. And then some time for questions afterward. So we'll get started. Maybe. All right. So I'll do some quick intros real quick and have them sort of wave their hand. They're going to introduce themselves when they come back up as well. I am Matt Lesko. I'm the operations manager. I've been working for Nutrien for about 10 years. Before that, spent 10 years in oil refining. Started off as an engineer and worked my way up through the ranks as the operations manager. Nancy Wireman can wave her hand. She's going to talk to you a little bit about HR and benefits. When we get to the testing sessions, Allison Stuckey is going to talk about the mathematics piece and mechanical aptitude and problem solving. Josh Keller is going to talk to us about that. Vocabulary, Chelsea Holford is going to talk to us about that. She's a lab tech there. And then technical reading comprehension, some tips for test taking. Russ Decker is going to talk to us about that. Then we'll come back to myself for FAQs. All right. So a little bit about Nutrien. I won't read the words word for word, but you can kind of see some of the statistics there. Nutrien's the world's largest provider of crop nutrients, inputs, and services. Clearly, we play a critical role not just in Lima, but obviously the state, the country, the world. You'll see a little bit of that as well. There's a statistic there for how many tons of potash, nitrogen, and phosphate products we sell. And ultimately, really, it's about feeding people, right? If you've been around for any period of time, you can kind of see, especially around here, farmland gets sold for lots of different reasons, right? What can farmers do with less land, right? Well, that's what fertilizer is all about. So Nutrien does potash, nitrogen, phosphate, and has a retail arm as well. So potash is mostly coming from mines that are in Canada and the northern part of North America. There's other places for that as well. Nitrogen is actually what the Lima facility is all about. We'll talk a little bit about that. So nitrogen-based fertilizers and where they come from and what some common products that you may see that you may not realize where they come from. Phosphate, very similarly, is a blend, actually, of chemical manufacturing, but also preceded by mining as well. And then, of course, the retail arm is probably the most visible, I would say, especially for folks that are in the agricultural industry. Right? A very small map that you probably can't read, but you can go back and look at things a little bit later online. But a couple of the statistics that I think really should jump out at you. We talked a little bit about the millions of tons of production every year and 1,500 locations in 7 different countries. A few of those kind of displayed there for South America, Australia, North America there. Getting more specific, Lima is a nitrogen facility. We'll talk about that more here in a minute. But there's 10 nitrogen facilities actually just in North America alone. Quite a few in Canada, but some in Baton Rouge area, Louisiana, some in Georgia, some in Washington, a little bit of everything, and 22,000 employees worldwide. So, I mean, if I'm you, what I'm gathering from that is that Nutrien's a fairly large company, right? A little bit about the Lima site. So there are around 200 Nutrien employees, 100 to 150 contractors, depending on the day. That can get upwards of even 1,000 contractors during what we call turnarounds or shutdowns, all squeezed into that tiny little orangish red location there, right? We are one part of a very large facility. If you're not from Lima, some people have called that the divorce. when one company actually owned all of that area and eventually had sold it off bit by bit, piece by piece, and Nutrien eventually became the owner of the nitrogen facility there. Some of the products that we make at Lima, DEF might be, or DEF might be one of the most familiar chemicals. So at Lima, it's not just about agricultural, although that is definitely a big part of the business that we do. There is a fair amount, like nitric acid and DEF, that have an industrial background to them. So, if you meet with investors, they talk to you about, diversifying your portfolio, right, to kind of help carry you throughout ups and downs in the market. Well, Lima's just that way, and a lot of our nitrogen facilities are. Some other places that you would see urea, the little white balls in fertilizer, like Scott's fertilizer that you use for your lawn, right? Usually those are coated in something by Scott's, but the base is urea. Insulin, that's actually something that surprises a lot of people. Eli Lilly is one of our major customers, and our urea, which is ultra pure, they're using to formulate man-made insulin. Kind of moving down the list, anhydrous and metallurgical ammonia. That's a big fertilizer, obviously, when you're driving past fields and you see the nurse tanks out in the field, the white nurse tanks, that's typically ammonia. Refrigeration systems as well. Ammonia's got some unique characteristics which make it possible to use for industrial refrigeration systems. So when you see the freezers, the industrial size freezers, or the manufacturing plants for food, when they're keeping their food fresh, that's typically what they're using. Nitric acid, again, talked about the industrial applications of that. You can see a lot of them right there. Rechargeable batteries, probably one of the most common ones. Ammonium nitrate has definitely some fertilizer applications to it as well. We sell quite a bit of it in the fertilizer market as UAN, or urea ammonium nitrate solution, which is the one on the bottom, but a fair amount of it also gets used for building roads or for mining. It's a precursor for an explosive, actually. And then carbon dioxide, and then we have a carbon dioxide plant that lives right next to us and takes a byproduct of ours and turns it into Coke. We talked about UAN, and so that's some of the most common ones, I would say, of products that we make. Hopefully a couple of them that you wouldn't have guessed that we did. For next steps, I'm going to turn it over to Nancy, and she'll talk with you about benefits and sort of the timeline of things.
Hi, everyone. I'm Nancy Wireman. I'm the HR advisor at the Lima site. I have been there a little over 14 years now, but not always in this position. I've been in this position about 5 years. So next steps. Hopefully I can read that all the way there. I may be turning around this way. So just so you're aware, you will be completing testing at the Ohio Means Jobs at this facility. In this room, actually, is where they'll be conducting the testing. The sessions will be in September and October, and Ohio Means Jobs will be contacting everyone. They'll reach out to you. Interviews will be conducted here as well. The candidates will receive an email or a phone call from Ohio Means Jobs to set up a day or a time that's good for you, and these will be held in November, all of the interviews. The site tours / second interviews, if you do well in the first interview, you will be called back for a second. And those will be conducted actually at the Lima site, the Nutrien site. And those will be in December. So it's a bit of a process, takes a little bit of time. And you've got, holidays going on in there as well. So takes a little bit of time to get through everything. You'll receive word within 2 weeks of your interview. That's typical. Usually it's less than that, but we like to say at least within 2 weeks. If you're offered a position, there is a background check and a drug screening that's required to go through. Some of our benefits. There is an annual bonus program. They call that the Nutrien Performance Incentive, or NPI. We offer the qualifications-based pay increases. So your increase in pay, there is 9 levels for an operator, and the increase in pay is as you gain skill through on-the-job training. Some may learn quicker than others, so you may progress a little quicker than someone else or a little slower than someone else, but that's absolutely fine. We don't expect you to know everything right off the bat. You'll have basic operator training, which I'm sure Matt will talk about that later. And you'll be in there for approximately 6 weeks if you're offered the position. And like I said, we don't expect you to know everything within those 6 weeks. You'll learn a lot. It'll take time. 401k savings plan. The company match, that's 100% of the employee contribution on the first 3%. So if you contribute 3, the company will contribute 3, and you'll have a total of 6%. We have your typical medical, dental, and vision plans. Currently, we have Anthem Medical, Delta Dental, and VSP for vision. That's what we currently have. We've had those for probably 2 to 3 years now. I know we've had Anthem for longer than that. We also offer life insurance and accidental death and dismemberment. There is a company-provided short-term disability plan. For anyone that may have to have surgery, you are covered as you're out during that time through this short-term disability program. There's also a long-term disability program offered. PTO, that is paid time off, like vacation. Ours is kind of vacation, sick, personal, all wrapped into one for the operators. You'll start at 120 hours. Of course, that'll be prorated the first year because you're not starting on January 1, so they'll prorate that. But you begin with 120 hours. Holidays are 10 per year. It's your typical holidays. Of course, there's a couple days for Christmas, a couple days for Thanksgiving. We do give a little bit more there. Some companies do just the 1 day for each. We do have 2 days for those. Okay, I think that was all that I had, and I will pass it on to Allison for math.
Okay, so we'll talk a little bit about the test itself. So I'm going to cover the mathematical pieces of the test, just some tips, and we'll just go through a few sample questions. We'll give you a few opportunity, just a few seconds, come up with the answer, and we'll see once if our answers align with each other. First of all, so it's usually just going to be something short as far as the mathematical problems. It's not going to be a long, drawn-out mathematical algebraic equation or anything like that, so don't be afraid if you're not typically consider yourself a math person. So one very distinct thing that we want to make sure that we point out is when you take the test, you'll have a testing booklet and you'll have an answer sheet or a booklet. It'll be pre-printed, so you'll have to make sure your answers align to the correct questions, and there will be space on there. For your math answers for those types of problems, you're going to want to pay attention to those pre-printed lines. In the case where there are partials, so not everything, the answer may not be a whole number every time, you'll want to pay attention to the answer sheet. If there's a decimal point already pre-printed on your sheet, you'll want to answer it like 10 and a half, so 10.5. Don't put 10, 1/2. So pay attention to the answer sheet. Make sure you understand what is actually being asked for, what form the number and the answer is being asked in, and you answer it appropriately. So we'll just go through a couple of very quick sample questions. This is one that you might see on the exam or something very, very similar to it. So we deal a lot with tanks at the plant. So we have there's 8 gallons of water in a tank. And the tank can hold a total of 16.5 gallons. How many gallons can be added to the tank? It really should say what's the maximum number of gallons that can be added to the tank. So obviously the answer is 8.5 gallons. So the idea here is just simple mathematics, subtraction. It'll hold 16.5 minus the 8 that are already in it. You can put a total of 8.5 in it additional. Another sample question. So now we're getting into division. How many feet are there in 100 inches? I couldn't do this one in my head to start with either. It took me a minute. You will have scrap paper. I'm told you will have scrap paper. You can do these calculations on the side. So 8 1/3 feet. The answer format on this one assumes that your answer sheet just has a line and there's no decimal point in it. So in this case, you would answer in this format 8 1/3, not 8.3333. One more sample question. What percentage of the table is dark green? So 20%. So however you looked at that, you would come up with the same answer. So if you count the total number of blocks on there, there's 25 blocks. 5 of them are dark green. 5 divided by 25, 20%. This really isn't a question, but just something that you should be familiar with is understanding how to read a graph. This isn't something we come across in our daily lives necessarily, possibly, depending on what you do for a living currently. But the idea here is just understanding how to read a graph and what's being displayed on it. So in any graph, you'll most likely, on a simple graph, you're going to have a 2-axis. You'll have the vertical going up and down. In this case, we're talking about number of students. And across the bottom will be your second axis, or your horizontal axis. And this is kind of the answers, or the potential answers from this. We'll say this is maybe results of a survey that we did. So we asked students, what is your favorite type of music? From this graph, there's a couple things that we can call out. Obviously, we can see that jazz was the most popular. The most respondents said, yes, jazz is my favorite type of music. The fewest said rock. Would not have been my answer necessarily that jazz was my favorite, but I guess I'm in the minority. So just looking at that and understanding the correlation, or even seeing the number. You know, there were 12 respondents who said hip hop is my favorite type of music. So I think we're holding all questions till the end. Is that right? So if you have any questions specifically on the mathematics section, we can come back to that later. I'm going to pass it over to Josh now.
All right, good evening. Appreciate everybody taking some time out of your night to join us. Glad you're interested in not just Nutrien as a company, but specifically the operator role. So my name's Josh Keller. I've been with Nutrien, formerly Potash Corp., formerly Ineos, formerly Innovine, for about 16 years. So I'm the technical training manager at the site. Started as an operator 16 years ago, so was quite literally sitting in the same seat that you all are. Good job. The company, the site's been very good to me and my family. So I'm rooting for everybody. It's a good place to work, and I'm glad you're here. So Allison did mention it. There will be a question and answer portion at the end, and I believe Matt will talk a little bit about it. But all the individual presenters will also be staying after this is over, so you can get a lot of your questions answered then too. So please take advantage of it. This is your opportunity to find out a little bit more about the company, about the role that you're hoping to get into. If you have questions about the schedule, if you have questions about the company, the site, anything at all. So be sure you think about those and get those answered before you get out of here. So Allison covered a little bit of the math portion of the test. So I'll go into a little bit of the mechanical aptitude and problem solving. So similar to about any job, problem solving is going to be a huge part of being a successful operator. You have issues, you have things that pop up out in the plant that you have to go out and to address, and a lot of times you may not know the answer right off the bat, but to be able to think critically and logically through a lot of these processes and come at the best answer. Sometimes there's not a great answer. Sometimes there's just the best option. But to be able to process critically through and logically think about a lot of those things is going to be a huge key to being successful. So this will give you a little bit of a flavor of what you might see during the problem solving and mechanical aptitude portion of the test. So, and I, being a technical training manager, I tend to like audience participation. So for this first one, which letter shows the seat where the passenger will get the smoothest ride on this bus? What do we think? C, yeah. Why do we think C? Why not? Let me ask you this. Why do we not think A? Yeah, all the way in the back. Think of like when you're on a seesaw, right? Where do you move the most? Right at the end of the seesaw, right? So absolutely. B, you're right over the wheel. You're going to feel every little thing, like the princess laying on the bunch of the mattresses with the pee underneath. You're going to feel it all. So yeah, C is going to be your best answer there of where you're going to get the smoothest ride on that bus. Again, so to be able to think through the options and to be able to arrive at the best one for the problem that you're on. Well done, everyone. All right, we have these two folks here. Which person carries more weight? What does it look like? Person A or person B? Yeah, person A getting the good side of that deal right there. Yeah, person B is carrying a lot of that weight, right? So you see the weight, that box that's kind of on that pole shifted more towards person B, going to be carrying more of that load. So absolutely. So I think that, is the last one. So kind of give you a little bit of an idea again. A lot of it is choosing the best option for whatever situation you might be in. So again, glad you're here. Welcome. Appreciate you taking some time to learn a little bit more about the roles in the company. And again, think of those questions and make sure you don't leave here without getting some answers to them. So I will turn it over to Chelsea.
Thank you. Hi, I am Chelsea Holford. I am a lab tech. I have been with Nutrien for about 1.5 years now. I have worked at a couple chemical factories for about 2 years, and then I worked in oil and refining for 5 years, and I would say Nutrien is by far the best company I have ever worked for, so I recommend trying to work here. We are going to start with vocabulary. The test is going to be 50 questions. You will have 5 minutes to answer. It's going to be all multiple choice, and you will be provided a short question, and you are to select the best answer. So we'll move on to 2 examples. Sample question number 1, which is an animal? A, orchid, B, squirrel, C, tulip, or D, crystal? The answer would be B, squirrel. It is the only one that is an animal. We're moving on to the second. Which does not belong? Red, green, purple, or sweet? A lot of these questions are going to ask which one does not belong or which one does belong. You're going to want to pay attention more so to the fact that it can be a little tricky, especially when you only have 5 minutes to answer them. So here, the answer is the only one that is not a color, which is D, sweet. And that is that. Passing it off to Russ here.
All right, thank you, Chelsea. And Chelsea, her husband, by the way, is an operator, so if you've got questions about the shift work and how that impacts the home life and things, Chelsea, I'm sure, would answer some of those questions for you before you leave tonight. So the last part of the test has to do with basically reading and comprehension. And so the big thing here is to read the paragraph carefully, and the answers are going to be multiple choice, so we'll read this together. So metals play a very important role in modern industry. However, pure metals are rarely used. Instead, different metals are mixed together to form combinations called alloys. For example, brass is a combination of copper and either zinc or tin. Alloys are generally harder than the individual metals which compose them and poorer conductors of heat and electricity than pure metals. So that's the paragraph they're going to have you read, or something very similar. And then there'll be 1 or 2 questions about that paragraph. I strongly suggest that as you look at the question, go back and look at the paragraph again. But so here's the sample question. Alloys are best described as, anybody want to shout out what you think it is? Did I hear D? There we go. So what I did on this slide was I went back, and that's where you could find exactly the answers in the question. I mean, the answer is right there in that paragraph you just read. So if you just go back, if you're not sure. The other thing I want to just point out here, because it's just a little tip about test taking, is if you can eliminate any of these because you don't think that's what was in the paragraph at all, just eliminate them. And sometimes you can get the correct answer that way. So another question, compared to the pure metals, which compose them, alloys are better conductors of electricity, poorer conductors of heat, generally softer, or less important in industrial use. There you go. And again, that was the very last part of that paragraph. So a lot of times if you're not sure, just go back and look at the paragraph and what did it talk about conductors. Find the word conductor, and then what was it telling you in that paragraph will help drive you to the right answer. So in addition to my work at Nutrien, I also teach 1 night a week at a local university. So I have a lot of students over the last 15, 16 years have anxiety over test taking, and I get it. None of us like to take tests. So over the years, I've developed some tips that I tell my students to just kind of take a breath and let's get through this. You're gonna be fine. So my first step is always be well rested. I mean, man, don't run a marathon and then go in and come here and take your test, because you're gonna be whipped, and that doesn't help. Arrive early. A lot of you arrived early today, right? You got the seat you wanted. You felt comfortable. You will be able to have a drink at the table. When you come in, they're going to tell you the table has to be cleared except for the test materials, the pencils for the math. There'll be scratch paper provided, and you can have a beverage. That's it. So don't bring a lot of stuff with you, because you're not going to be able to have it on your desk. So get here early, relax, kind of, get the seat you want, and just, have a good attitude. Come in with the idea that you're going to kick this test in the butt, right? Don't come in with the attitude, it's like, I don't know, this is going to be, I don't think I should have taken this test. Because I promise you, if you think that you're not going to do well, you probably won't do well. So come in with a good attitude that's like, yeah, I think I can hit this. One of the reasons we did this informational session is to give you some samples of the types of questions. So if you feel like, hey, I think the reading part might be tough for me, or I think the math part might be tough for me, you've got some time now to go work on that. You can work on just that piece that you think you might be a little weak on. Do the easy questions first, right? Whip through and it's like, I know this one, I know this one. Make sure you go back. All of these tests are timed, so make sure you go back if you have time and look at the answers, the questions you didn't answer, and take a shot, right? If you've got time and they haven't said, hey, time to turn your test in, and you've got 3 questions that you haven't answered, don't close your test book. Still be working on at least 1 or 2 of those questions. Eliminate wrong answers. I tell my students that all the time. If you look at these multiple choice and you know that C and D are not it, now you got a 50-50 shot, even if you're taking a guess. If time's running out and you've got it down to A and B, now you got a 50-50 chance of getting it right by just eliminating the ones that you're positive are not the right question or not the right answers. And then if you have time, go back and just make sure you answered every question, because you hate to think you're sitting there, you've got a little bit of time, and you didn't go back and realize, oh, I skipped that one question and I forgot and didn't go back, and maybe that's, that could be the difference between passing or not passing that test. So the other thing I would tell you is don't care about the people around you, right? Don't worry about the person who finishes each section of the test first, and they're always done first, right? Because I will tell you, I've had students that were really good, smart kids, A students, but when I give them their first test or the first one done, And they usually, that first test will be a B or a C, because they thought they knew it all. They thought they had it whipped, and they just like were done. And it's like, if they had just taken another 5-10 minutes and checked their work, they probably would have done much better than just trying to like be the first one done. So you get no points for being the first one done. So take your time. So I guess that was already on there, right? Yeah, so, I mean, research tells us the people who finish first typically don't do as well. In fact, I started doing a trick my last few years that I've been teaching, that if somebody turns one in really early, I'll grade it. After they leave the room, because they'll typically leave the class after that, but I'll start grading it. And people do watch what the professor's doing, and if they start seeing me like checking off a lot of questions, it sort of gives them I better take my time, because that guy apparently missed a few questions there. All right, so we're getting to the question and answer part, and Matt's going to come back up and go over 3 or 4 questions that are almost always asked, and we'll answer those.
All right. Like Russ implied, these are probably the most common questions that I get or our operators get when we talk about the operator job. So I wanted to definitely cover those with you, but I would encourage you, just like Russ did, definitely don't hesitate at the end. We'll take questions not just about, frequently asked questions about the operator job, what I hope to cover now, but anything really, right? And then after we close out, further encourage you, just like Josh did, to come see individuals if you feel like, I don't know if I really want to ask that question in front of everybody, but I think I'd talk to Allison about this, or whatever it would be, right? So probably one of the most common questions that we get is, what does the schedule look like? I'm not even going to try and squint that hard to see back there, but hopefully you guys can see everything there. So we work 6 to 6, and we work alternating days and nights, 2 weeks of days, 2 weeks of nights, and it's what's commonly known as a 2-3-2 schedule. So if you're coming in at the beginning of our week and you're working Monday, Tuesday day shift, you'll have Wednesday, Thursday off, and then you'll work the weekend, Friday, Saturday, Sunday day shift. Come the following week, you've got Monday, Tuesday off, you'll work Wednesday, Thursday, and you get a nice long Friday, Saturday, Sunday weekend, right? So you'll notice that it's kind of opposite of for week to week, right? It's on that long weekend that you actually flip your body to nights. And so you'll work Monday, Tuesday nights, and the whole schedule repeats. It's just you're on the night shift schedule instead. And back and forth you go. Let's see here. We talked about all that. So area operators, you know your schedule for the most part the entire year forward. In fact, contractually, we're required to give that to you October 1st. So that there are a lot of pros and cons to working shift work. But one of the biggest things is to know, well, am I working Christmas this year? Am I working Thanksgiving this year? We'll get into holidays here shortly, but you'll know all of that ahead of time. We do have what's called mandatory coverage overtime. So even though you know your schedule, if someone takes off and we're looking for somebody to fill that shift, the very first person to fill that shift actually will be the people that we're hiring here for the most part. So you will be what's called a shift extra operator, and you'll fill that spot, or you'll fill a different spot and another person will fill that spot so that all the jobs are covered for that day. If we can't cover it, we're asking for voluntary overtime. So that's your chance to make a little bit extra money in your pocket, right? But if we can't fill that voluntary overtime, that's what we have a mandatory overtime list for. So it's not based on seniority. Everybody takes their part, and you kind of divide out the whole year amongst you and your crew. And if it falls on your day, it falls on your day. If it doesn't fall on your day, it doesn't fall on your day. Holidays, kind of the same thing, right? So there will be holidays that you'll work. Nancy covered that there's 10 holidays. That's just part of the job, right? Because the plant runs 365 days a year, 24 hours a day, and you're the one who's there to help us run it, right? Now, pros and cons to that as well, right? Nutrien acknowledges, and the union acknowledges that working holidays, that's not for everybody. It's not all fun and games, right? You're here working at the plant on Thanksgiving Day when your family may be eating Thanksgiving dinner, and you got to work your way around that, right? So there's extra pay for those situations as well, right? It's not just your normal schedule, if you will. What does an operator do? That's a question that I get from my kids. It's a question that I get from a lot of people, right? Ultimately, like I implied earlier, you're helping us run the plant 24/7, 365. We have lots of different units around the plant. They're all connected in some way. Some of them affect others more than others, right? There's plants that if this one goes down, the entire kit and caboodle goes down, right? But there's plants that aren't as impactful to that, and you're going to learn all of those connections, basically, right? We do maintenance, so whether it's preventative to prevent things from breaking, or whether it's corrective because something's broken, we need the maintenance department to fix it, you're the one who's preparing that equipment for maintenance, making sure it's ready to go. You're the one who's putting it back in service when it's back to us. It's not all just fighting fires, if you will, for whatever the emergency is for the day. Sometimes it's about working with our engineering department to figure out how can I make this better, right? And it's not just their ideas, right? It's kind of the whole of the plant working together to figure that out, right? It's, the operators sometimes coming up with really good ideas. It's the engineering department that makes it happen. It's the maintenance department that fixes it. It's the training department that makes sure everybody's trained to do it. It's the accounting department that makes sure everybody's counting how we're actually performing, right? You see how everything kind of fits together. And then Chelsea makes sure that we're actually on spec, right? So it's the whole thing. Taking samples and instrument readings to ensure equipment health. An operator round is what we would typically call that, right? You're our eyes and our ears in the field. You're passing by a compressor, a pump, a piece of equipment, and that doesn't sound right. Something's different there, and you're elevating that, or in some cases, figuring out yourself, oh, this isn't right. I need to do something about it immediately, right? What are the working conditions? That's a very common question as well. It's kind of like being a firefighter, right? So sometimes we're paying you to visit with your friends and catch up on training and talk about the Ohio State game, right? And sometimes you're going to be on your feet outside all day and it's going to suck, right? That's what the life is, right? It's all dependent on what's going on and what's happening, what I have to get ready, the activities for the night, the activities for the day, right? Personal protective equipment is a common term, PPE, that we throw around a lot, right? There's basic stuff, hard hat, safety glasses, flame retardant clothing, hearing protection that you'll wear, but there's also some specialized stuff that will teach you how to wear it, how to don it, but it's part of your job to wear a respirator in certain situations. It's part of your job to wear fall protection and work at heights in certain situations, right? And that can be a problem for some people. Are there opportunities to move or advance within the company? Josh is a great example of that. He mentioned it earlier, right? Started off as an operator. Within the facility, we have, I can count on at least 10 of my fingers, and I might have to take off my shoes and count my toes, of folks that were formerly operators that are in our safety department, that are in our maintenance department, that train people. There's countless examples of folks that, shine in the operations department, and eventually they work their way into the supervisory role, right? There's supervisory roles and staff that report directly to me within the department as well. But if, branching out is your thing, that map that we showed earlier, there's jobs that come about in Geismar and our Redwater facility in Canada that get posted online and anyone can apply, right? Is there requirements? Well, sure, for everybody, but with whatever education you have, experience that you have, it's open to anybody. And you see all those just like the person next to you, right? I think that's all that I had. Are there questions specifically about the FAQs, about the operations positions? Is there questions that, I can pass the mic to another person if we want to re-go over something? What do we have from the crowd today? Okay. I heard what was the starting base pay for operators. So $32 an hour is what's posted correctly on the Ohio Means Job website, and that's where you start. So that's certainly not where you end. Nancy implied it's a pay for knowledge is another way to call that, which is the more units that you learn to run, the more pay that you get, right? And we teach you those things that are going on in that unit. You have on-the-job training, so you can kind of learn to apply those principles, and eventually you could get to like $51 an hour is what it is right now, is where the peak pay is. But it takes you a while to get there. So on average, the average operator will work for probably 4 to 6 years to get yourself to the peak pay, if that helps. What else? That's right. So the gentleman back there asked, is it a union facility and are they covered by the United Steelworkers? That is correct. Go ahead, ma'am. Great question. So the lady in the back asked about mandatory overtime and how does that work? Do you get called beforehand? Do you know? The answer is most of the time. So, so when you're trying to fill those voluntary overtime slots that we talked about, right? Because an extra on shift like yourself wouldn't be able to fill that slot for some reason, then most of the time we know that in advance, right? So it's very common for folks, they'll call over to your unit and, hey, George, sorry, dude, you're on the mandatory overtime list for, tomorrow. You've got to come in for the first 6 or for all 12 or whatever it is, right? There are occasions because somebody calls in sick, right? And your shift begins at 6 o'clock. They call at, 5:15 feeling terrible. And they look at the list and there's no extras. Well, guess what? You're getting the phone call at 5:15 in the morning for your mandatory overtime. That help?
How many positions are you looking at?
Yep. So right now we are hiring for up to 7 operator positions. Yeah, so that is the exact test that is given. I think, what is the Bennett? Is that the right term? Yeah, the Bennett Mechanical Aptitude Test, yes, a version of that. All right, a couple of questions on the tests. Anything else? Yeah, good question. She asked if we had an emergency response team. So our emergency response team is mostly operators. There's other folks that are on it as well that fall in other departments, and it is completely voluntary. Shawnee Fire Department supports our plant as well from an emergency response perspective since we're in their district, right? But there's medical training, rescue training, level A suit is, I don't know if that term's familiar to everybody, but like if there's a release of some sort, exposure of some sort, there are suits that you can wear that can protect you from the chemicals that are being released, teach you how to do that. There is a certain minimum amount. I kind of implied that with the respirator conversation a little bit, that every operator will be expected to do, but there's a level over and above, I would say, that our emergency response team does. And that's actually led by somebody in our safety department, typically, it is now, who is familiar with a lot of those concepts and kind of shows you the ropes. There's even an emergency response competition team that we do that happens all around the company where you kind of get to showcase your skills a little bit.
Yeah, will there be any like a firefighter training along with that emergency response team, or will that not be handled by us?
So very similarly, firefighting concepts, which I would say are not as relevant in a chemical plant like ours, like it would be for a refinery just because of the nature of the beast. but it is still fairly relevant. And so you'll get part of that training as part of basic operator training on how to use a fire monitor, for example, right? How to put a fog on things, to absorb toxic chemicals, those types of things. So some very basic skills, what we would call like a first responder type skill level. But then the emergency response team will learn more things on top of that. And then obviously there's sort of another level that we're not typically learning that a fire department folks would learn for like interior fires and fighting, bigger fires that we would not teach typically.
Say we work a holiday, would that be considered holiday pay or just regular pay?
Yeah, so what I was implying a little bit further back, you'll be scheduled, so you'll know in advance. Now, overtime opportunities on a holiday are a different thing, but you'll know in advance, hey, this year I'm working Good Friday, or this year I'm working Thanksgiving or Christmas Eve, those kinds of things. So you know all that in advance. And if you do work the holiday, so that's the holiday day shift or the holiday night shift, whatever that day is, then you get additional pay on top of what you would normally get for working any other Tuesday or Monday or whatever it would be. So you get your normal pay plus a different amount of pay on top of that because it's a holiday. That's a good question. So the gentleman asked if most of the training was local. The answer is yes. In fact, probably 99% of our training for operators is local. Sometimes there's training opportunities that would be outside of the facility. It does happen. It's pretty rare. But most of it will actually occur on our facility, not even like here at OMJ, but like actually on the facility where you'll get to talk about a particular concept for pumps. And then, hey, let's go in the field and go look at that thing, right? And learn about what we actually learned about in the classroom, and kind of back and forth it goes to get you a very strong understanding is the idea, right? Anything else? Go ahead.
Since you're taking 7, and everybody submits a resume, how long does the resume stay relevant? If, say, 3 months, somebody doesn't make it, whatever,
Okay.
how often do you guys resubmit?
Sure. Nancy might be able to chime in here as well. So there have been some recent improvements actually that would allow our HR system to hold that resume for every single applicant for every single job that we can go back and visit. I will say this, it's not all that common for us to go back and look at, a backup candidate, if you want to call it that. That's kind of what you're getting at, I think. Typically, we'll wait till the following year, only because it takes a lot more training and effort, maybe than most people would think, to get a hiring class in of like 7 people and put them through 6 weeks of basic operator training, 5 weeks of unit-specific training, and then finally you're on shift. It's quite a bit. So typically to invite one more person in on a delayed thing a couple of months later and train them on that very same, 13-week process, right, is not very common.
So you'd wait for the next hiring process?
Typically, yeah, we would wait till the next year.
So then resubmit then or something like that?
Yep. But I will say this, the HR system, gets better and better. It allows us to go back and look at those borderline candidates, for example, if we felt like that was necessary. Go ahead. Yeah, great question. She asked, in case you couldn't hear, when there's a shutdown, and some of you would be very familiar with what we mean by that. Do I work my regular schedule, or is there something different, right? So once, typically every 4 or 5 years, the entire plant comes down. So we run normally 365 days a year, right? 24 hours a day. But once every 4 or 5 years, the entire plant comes down for what we call a turnaround. Lots of folks call it that, and my son would always joke that that means that dad goes to work, he comes home, and then he turns right around and goes back to work again. And that's why they call it a turnaround. But it's the idea is that you're down for 30 days and you're touching pieces of equipment that normally can't be shut down for us to run, right? And you're maintaining them and bringing it right back up. Typically for operators, there is an alternate schedule that we'll put the operators on that is an option. So we'll typically look for volunteers, and typically that means more work, more overtime if that's your thing, which some of our crowd, that's the case. But for those who just want to work the minimum, work your schedule, that's also an option, and you're just as helpful, right? So it's a mixed bag, I guess, is the answer. Go ahead. Might have to speak up a little bit. Typically, you'd have to fill out a whole new application for an operator, even if you applied for a different position previously. Am I saying that correctly, Nancy and Jennifer? Okay. Only because it's a different job, I'd say, is the biggest thing, right? So go through the application process, submit your resume, get on the testing schedule. That's the best thing you can do, I'd say. Lots of good questions. Anything else? All right, great. Well, again, I appreciate each and every one of you taking a little bit out of your evening to attend. Hopefully you gleaned a little bit on, if you haven't taken the test before, what's it all about. Hopefully you gleaned some test-taking tips from the folks that helped us out there. If you had some questions about benefits or what it is that even you're applying for, if it's not a world that's familiar to you, hopefully you learned a little bit about that too. And as has been emphasized, I'll say it one more time. If for some reason you didn't want to ask the question in front of everybody, or something occurs to you after we close out, certainly don't hesitate to come down and ask any one of us, and they'll point you in the right direction for whoever the best person is to answer. Thank you very much, and have a good evening and good luck.